Can you give me some history behind colorism? How did it form and how did it evolve?
Sure. So I think in order to think about the history, I kind of have this idea of Kimberly Crenshaw, the person who coined the term intersectionality. She when she talked about the definition of what intersectionality is, she just made this statement about when we don't have language for words, right, then we can't, it leaves us in a place where we have problems that we can't fix. So we have to define them. And so I hold the same thing I hold colorism in the same way. And so I think about just what colorism means, right, and what it perpetuates. And so it definitely, before talking about what it is, let's talk about, for example, what it's not, and that it's not racism, right, and it's not discrimination as it pertains to ethnicity, but they are inherently linked. And so it's kind of like the privileging of light-skinned people over dark-skinned folks, right, whereas dark-skinned folks are experiencing this perpetual discrimination. And so with that, when we think about the history, it's rooted in this colonial legacy, and that European folks had infiltrated communities of color, specifically Latinx communities, African American communities, and even Asian communities, and that this standard of beauty, right, which is considered lighter, which is considered to have Eurocentric features, is somehow placed over what's associated with dark skin, and features that are also associated with that skin color or darker skin. And so colonialists, I guess, colonizers have done this so successfully in various cultures around the world. And when we think specifically to the USA, they have done it so well that they've internalized this, right, in all of the systems that we experience in society, right? So you think about media, you think about education, you think about housing, you think about all of these things, and how this idea, right, is just deeply rooted and ingrained, and really reinforces what we think the standard of beauty is, right? What we think the standard of intelligence is, what we think success looks like, right, is often this same sort of like in the same wheelhouse, right? So colorism is usually existing in communities of color. But the thing that gets a little bit tricky is that it's associated specifically with biology because it depends on how you phenotypically look. But the privilege and the system that's been created as a result is not something that we inherently come with. But I also want to say that this is not to say, right, that discrimination doesn't exist in these communities, even though colorism does. And so that point is what I'm trying to say with that is that a Black person who is light-skinned might still experience the same discrimination as a person who is dark-skinned, but the person who is darker-skinned is almost has a double whammy, right? It's escalated because of that. Yes. And also, sorry, all right, this is my last one. Pertaining to the historical comment. So the idea of perpetuating what the standard of beauty is, folks originally, right, in order to be, we all want to connect, we all want to be liked, right? And so this colonial legacy perpetuated this standard so deeply and so well that people who wanted to people wanted to emulate this, right? They considered that this was beautiful. This is who I want to be. I want to be accepted by these folks, right? And so then you have that perpetuation in things like slavery in the U.S., right? Or you have that perpetuated in the history of Asia, where laborers, right, who worked outside, right, their skin would get darker, and those who like worked inside, right? And so that was considered higher status, right? And so when we go back to African Americans and thinking about or being Black in America in slavery, we think about, oh, well, the person who was in the field versus the person who was in the house. And so all is perpetuating this idea about darker and lighter, and how darker is somehow less than and associated with synonyms like degraded or ugly or unsuccessful or failure, and white or lighter skinned folks are associated with things like success and higher status and access. I would say what maintains the existence of colorism is the systems that we've created or that have been created in society to perpetuate these historical ideals of what the standard of beauty is. And so that looks like when you turn on TV, right, and you see folks who are in servant roles, right, and whether they're the maid or, right, you think about a telenovela, and the person who is the maid or the driver or whatever, right, those people are typically darker skinned. Now, what I think maintains colorism is that the pervasive history has infiltrated the systems that have been created in society that privileges light-skinned people over dark-skinned people. And so you can see this, I think, in things like housing and healthcare and the justice system, or some people might say the lack thereof, or the lack of justice system, and education, and even in, the just social capita that people have versus don't have, depending on the color of their skin.